Okay guys, we have a very special treat today. We're going to be looking at my main man Jeff playing under the screen name Bet Maxim, and he will be playing a PokerStars WPT PCA Step 6A $2,100 satellite into the Bahamas event. And Jeff is a guy that I've been coaching for a couple months now live, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we discussed going into this tournament, and we're going to take you through his entire journey of winning a seat. Now, the number one thing, Jeff started off as a very solid multi-table live player, and the first thing that we discussed was tightening up for the Siningos and playing tight early, making sure to make it into the money, and then doing solid late game decisions. And when we got past those basics and really began concentrating on the more advanced things, we had to relook on some of the traditional Siningo strategy for this step series of qualifiers. And in particular, the three main things we talked about going into it were as follows. First, the starting stacks are 3,000 chips deep rather than 1,500. So with 150 blinds deep rather than 75, you're getting a lot better implied odds. So for instance, if you have an early position raiser, perhaps doubling the bet, and you're in the button with a low pocket pair, you'd have to call here because the implied odds are simply too good. And in addition, since the prizes for second through sixth or seventh are very nominal, and essentially it's almost like a winner take all, with the winner taking a $12,000 prize package, then you want to play this a lot more like the what I call WTA events in my book, Cynical Strategy. And in particular, these will be ones where the winner takes effectively the entire prize pool. And as a result of that, you don't have to worry about ICM and tournament equity so much, but you want to be looking to play a little more like a cash game. And if you have any type of decision where you figure to win chips that has a positive chip expectation, then you should go ahead and seize it. Anytime you can win chips in a winner take all, which this basically is, you should go ahead and do that. And the last thing we discussed was table selection, because there are a lot of sharks buying directly in for 2100, and what they do is they win their seat, or maybe even buy in directly, and then they play for the W dollars, knowing that a lot of guys who buy in from $7.50, $21, etc., are going to be strung along the ladder, make it in, and as a result, Jeff should probably enter with his twos here. With 150 blinds deep, it's going to be tough not to show a profit, at least limping. I think limping would be my preferred play with the twos, but that's not a big mistake for middle position. And this ace-9, good laydown. And again, so these guys, and you'll see quite a few regulars that play these qualifiers looking for soft money, and even after they've won a seat, they can get W dollars, which they can then redeem for cash at a discounted rate or use to buy into other events. And you really want to avoid these sharks. So we figured out together that the easiest tables were generally occurring earlier in the day. And what I said to Jeff, what we agreed on, was that he should play the first one that opens up in a given day. So we had to modify his schedule to do that, but he played one that opened at 2 or 3 p.m., and that was a really smart decision on his part, because as a result, he only has a few guys who are really solid here, a few guys who are definitely losing players, and it's not one of those outrageously tough tables that he would get maybe at 8 or 10 p.m. when you've got a lot of sharks just waiting for these to fill up. Okay, here Jeff checks his option, smart, and he bets out with top pair. And that's a good bet. Again, you would bet out at a cash game with top pair, and he would not invest more chips in the pot if that hadn't taken it right there. So it's usually going to be good, and if not, he can usually walk away. This is a pretty clear complete, getting 3 to 1, and when bet to win raises there's no reason to invest another 60 chips out of position. So that's a very solid play. The only regular that I really recognize here is going to be Kid Wonder, who's a very solid Sngman101 regular. And a couple of these other guys may be good, but certainly it's not going to be a table full of maniacs who are going to have. What you want to be able to do is really exploit risk aversion and really make these guys be willing, put them to the test, make them forfeit a pot or gamble for a lot of chips. And fortunately, there are not going to be a lot of other people with that strategy in this game. Okay, this raise is a little loose from the hijack with ace 9. I think ace 9 suited or ace 10 would be a little more solid. And coming in with a weaker ace like ace 7 through ace 9 would be a lot more easy to pull off and pull off a chip gain from the button. But when Jeff does get re-raised, even though he's getting better than 2-to-1 odds, he's out of position with a hand that could easily be dominated, and so he lets it go, which is smart. And I'll tell you the funny thing about this is I bid on him for a decent number of W dollars, and before we got those, he puts $7.50 into a step 1, mainly for fun, and he took that step 1 with consecutive wins and got to the step 6A. So major props to Ben Maxim for demolishing these PCA steps, and we're really going to be looking at the process of them. And the strategy really does vary as you climb up the ladder, because for a lot of them, for instance, you have a situation where the top 2 guys advance on, and there your strategy really has to be that you absolutely do not want to be the caller. When it gets down to 3 or 4 guys, you want to be the aggressor, and there will be a huge gap. Getting about 5-2 there, Jeff could make a call, but I don't think that it's hard to go very wrong either way. If it's folded here, you should complete, certainly not with a raise. And one thing is, you definitely want to cater these to your individual background. And Ben Maxim's background is one of cash and multi-tables, so a lot of the sit-and-go guys have fear of flop. They don't like to play a lot of post-flop poker, and they just want to take it down with aggressive pre-flop play. And because Jeff has a much stronger comparative advantage after the flop, another thing we discussed, and this is one thing that I think we're going to be looking at later in the game, is how to really convert it into the type of match where he's going to enjoy the strongest comparative edge. And for now, though, he is correct to basically be playing a fairly tight game unless he gets some decent cards or really has a good position to exploit position. And, with deep stacks and guys, they're so far playing relatively tight. We have Dangler. Again, our numbers here are going to be number of hands, VPIP percent, PFR percent, and post-flop aggression factor. And most of the players are playing relatively tight, so Dangler's loose. Bet to win has been a little loose aggressive, and most of the other guys have been rather tight, Chris 75 in particular. So from the button, and to a lesser extent the cutoff, you could open up relatively wide and come in for small raises, and after the flop, make a continuation bet. There's no reason to get too heavily involved. Okay, here there's an early position limper. Jeff comes in for a standard raise to 4 blinds, gets a caller in late position, and let's see what happens. So pre-flop, very good, pretty standard. Okay, with 2 other guys in the pot and Jeff having missed completely, I would not fire out another bullet here. But at the turn, when both guys have checked And another card comes that doesn't look like it's helped anybody. This is a mandatory bet. Okay, again, that's because everyone has shown weakness, and it's very unlikely that this 8 of clubs has helped anybody. Okay, most guys aren't going to be playing for a raise with a hand that contains an 8, and it's just, if they didn't like the flop, it's very unlikely that some guy's going to say, hey, this turn is really good for me. So this is a definite bet, and there's no reason to make a very large bet. He could certainly bet more like 250, 300 here. 210 works as well, and when this guy stays in, pretty much his strategy should be to see a showdown as cheap as possible. So check is good, gets checked behind, and it's tough to say, okay, this guy's got pocket nines, and it's played a little passively, not so bad, but I think a lot of players would have lost more on that hand, and it's good. I mean, when everyone is showing weakness, you do have to take a stab at some point, but when it looks like you're beat, and that turn call indicated that Jeff most likely did not have the best hand at the time, he didn't go on and make an unnecessary river bluff, and I think that's really smart. Okay, it's a complete, and Jeff checks, which is good. I think that King 6, like a King low hand, it doesn't play very well after the flop, so this is a time when I don't like raising a complete, and Jeff bets out and takes it after this guy shows, again, no strength at the flop. The types of hands that I prefer raising a complete with are hands that, obviously the premium hands, but ones that are more disguised. Like I'd rather raise 4 or 5 suited than I would King 6 off. Just because when you do play a bigger pot with the low king and the guy's willing to get involved, then you're either going to take it down immediately at the flop, or when you don't, you're going to find yourself in a bad position a lot of the time. Okay, if you flop top pair with a weak king, and you've got a real tight guy like this willing to give you action, that is bad. Okay, the majority of the time you're not going to be looking good there. So just check, play a small pot, and that's exactly what he did. And I like the flop bet. Bet on 100. Min bet would have worked, 100 works. Don't want to overbet, but any of those options are fine. From 50 to 100. Okay, pretty clear fold. Again, Singleton and Chris have been real tight. Liquid Shoes and Bet to Win, roughly standard. And Dangler's been real loose. And while you can get a statistically significant to be one of those math guys, which I guess I kind of am. I hate to admit it, but it's not statistically significant, but at the same time, any information is better than nothing. And you really have some idea that this guy is willing to mix it around a little, whereas this guy, for instance, now he's raising, and it's very unlikely that he's doing this with air. It's so, okay, maybe we'll get to see, but okay, we can just pause right now. I mean, he's certainly got at least ace-jack or pocket sevens or king-queen suited, whereas if this guy was raising under the gun, he could easily have a hand like ace-9 or some donk hand like that. Okay, after he checks the turn, this could be a missed ace-king. He folds, so unfortunately we don't get to see. That would be my best guess. After he raises before the flop, fires out a c-bet, and then gives it up, having missed. So pocket jacks are possible, ace king would be my best guess. And we'll see if we can get anything there. So again, that blind defense is maybe a bit uncharacteristic, but without seeing the showdown, it's hard to conclude much, and from that we really have to go more on our stats. Okay, this is a bet you can't call, getting better than 2 to 1. Weak jack doesn't play well at all after the flop. And one thing that Jeff and I talked about a lot going into this, and even before, is a lot of times, like many players, he would begin to get a little impatient when the cards weren't going his way and his stack was dwindling a little, blinds were escalating. And now he's really worked on not tilting, and he's not tilting at all in this game, because with the exception of an early ace-king, he really hasn't been getting any cards, and yet he's still playing a solid, tight, aggressive game. So that's really good. And to play a hand like that, maybe 5-7 suited from the button, but offsuit from the cutoff you can't play. This should be a fold. The filter comes in for a raise. So hands that are pretty obviously folds, we'll just skip. And when the chip count doesn't change, we confirm that he doesn't enter. Okay, pocket nines, you have to raise. So it's pretty standard 3-blind raise. And I think that's good. A lot of times I raise to 2.5 blinds, but nines don't play super well after the flop, so he's happy to just win immediately. And also, you don't want a guy to call you with position because it's hard to know where you stand after the flop with a hand like that. So essentially trying to buy the button and discourage late position callers is good, and that's easier to do with a more conventional raise to around 3 blinds rather than the more small ball approach of 2.5 blinds that I often favor. Okay, he gets the walk. Probably call a min raise or something small. Not looking to play a really big pot there. Ace Queen is looking pretty good. Let's see what happens. Okay, Chris75 comes in for a raise. He's a tight guy. We talk in Single Strategy a lot about distinguishing steal raises from value raises, and one point that's really crucial is a tight guy, normally you want to think value as his primary motive when he steals, but anyone raising to 3 blinds from the button, okay, you've got to think steal there. That is a classic time to steal, it's a classic steal amount, and ace-queen is way too strong to let go. Flat calling is a very weak play here, so the play he's got to make is to raise. So let's hope he does that. Very good. And Chris gives it up rather than play a big pot. Talking with Chef afterward, he said that if Chris had called, he would have shoved any flop, and that's smart. It doesn't really make a lot of difference there whether you come in for a big pot committing raise like Jeff did, or you simply reshove immediately. Okay, in either case, you're not letting a hand that strong go against what appears to be a clear steal raise. So either tripling the bet to a pot committing amount or shoving all in, both work very well. King 8 is definitely too weak to play there. Okay, 9-10 suited, I wouldn't mind a raise to around 250 here, and that would be kind of a aggressive multi-table style. And the more conservative style, that's a fold. It's a fine fold. If you wanted to be aggressive though, that hand is a lot better to open with from middle position than a hand like a low ace or a king 8 or something. Queen king, I like a raise here. I'd probably make a standard raise to around 250, 300. And folding is a little tight, but it's not so bad. From middle or late position, it would be a big mistake to fold king queen. But from early position, it's really fine. It's not a hand that you're sacrificing a lot of value by giving up from early position. And mid-suited connectors under the gun you definitely want to discard. So that's pretty clear. Okay, everyone folds to Chris 75. Again, Jeff has no reason to build a pot before the flop with a junk hand. And Chris bets out. We've got no piece to clear fold. One thing we talked about a lot in general Single play, and this is one thing I'm real big on, you've seen this in all my videos, is that I really, if a guy checks, say he completes from the small blind, I'm in the big blind, and he checks to me, I'll fire out a large percent of the time with the flop. If for any reason I don't, and he checks the turn, I'm going to bet 100% there. And meanwhile, if I am in the small blind, it's the same thing. If I don't bet the flop, I'm certainly going to bet the turn because after he's shown weakness, then you've got to attack at some point, particularly in heads up blind on blind. Here, Jeff with Jack Queen off definitely has to raise. He makes it a standard raise to 300. I'd probably raise a bit smaller to 225, 250, because it's a top pair hand. You want to be restolen, but that's really more of a nitpicky thing. It's a difference of like 60 chips, and the key thing there is that he came in for a raise with a solid hand on the button. So, like we've discussed in the past, if you can avoid significant raises in most forms of poker, not just the no-limit sit and go, you're going to be doing King 10 suited. I think that's a fine fold. It's a hand that looks real pretty, but 2 off the button doesn't play super well. If you did come in with a small raise, that would be fine. But again, if you can avoid significant mistakes, you'll be doing very well in most forms of poker that you play. And the significant mistake there, limping would be very weak, a folding would be very weak, a dump really just over shoving or some really big raise. But the difference between raising to 250 or 300 is very nominal. Okay, ace queen suited is a definite raise. 300's fine. A lot better than 400, 500, the type of overbets that you see a lot of guys make when they get a big hand, but they're scared of the flop and they just want to take it immediately. There's no reason to resort to push fold poker over 30 blinds deep. Okay, bet to win makes kind of an uncharacteristic high blind limp, and it should definitely be checked. Pair of sixes normally you'd bet, but this guy could have aces or something. I mean, 13.6, 10.6, that's the stats of a guy who's pretty much tight aggressive, and limping under the gun's kind of suspicious. There's definitely a chance he's got some kind of overpair, and if you got flop 2 pair or something, you have a good opportunity to stack him. But again, just mid pair, it's not worth getting involved. This is the second time bet to win has come in for a raise when Ben Maxim has smooth completed. So we should be looking to adjust to that, in particular by either trapping with a complete and a strong hand, or raising more often, but basically just knowing that you can't hope to casually complete and not get raised, because a lot of hands will raise. Okay, the fives could be reshoved there. That would be, the pot is around 675, and it's about almost 5 times, a bit over 5 times Ben Maxim stack. And certainly if this guy were in later position, like say he were the cutoff and Ben Maxim were the button, that'd be a clear re-steal. As is, filter's been kind of tight, and because he's opening early, I think that's a fine laydown. If you did go ahead and re-steal there, that certainly wouldn't be a huge mistake. You guys certainly aren't looking to play big pots. You're already at 75, 150 with 10 or 15 minute blind levels, and nobody's been eliminated. Hey, these guys are bound to have some kind of hand. They're both willing to go all in, and we're not going to see junk, I'm pretty sure of that. So ace, king, and jacks. And now Stockpoker is the first guy to come off to a nice lead. Okay, any pocket pair higher than sevens, I'd say would definitely had to be raised. As is, you can raise the sevens, you can fold them. Only move I really don't like there would just be limping. Okay, any action? Clearly we're going to give this up. So this is a situation where if it's folded to Ben Maxim, he just folds. Now normally getting 3 to 1, he'd want to call with a 7-5, but his hand isn't strong enough to raise, and that's an example of an excellent adjustment because bet to win has raised his last 2 completes. So pretty much he'd just be sacrificing 75 chips with a complete there, and that's a real smart adjustment. Okay, sevens in later position need to be raised. 450 is not my preferred raise with I prefer 375, 400. It's not so bad though. I mean, the important thing is that Ben Maxim is raising, which is good. Then we're just getting just over 3 to 2. Liquid Shoes has been playing real tight. Against an overcards, this would be a clear call. Against the pairs, if this guy has a pair, it's going to be an overpair more often than under pair because a lot of guys, when particularly a real tight player, a lot of times is not going to do this with say twos through fives. So if he has a mid-high pair, the high pairs really outnumber the low pairs. And since in those situations he's going to be an 80-20 dog, and he's only going to be racing with the overcards, 3 to 2 just isn't good enough here. I think about 2 to 1, or if this guy were hyper aggressive, he'd want to make the call. But I think that's a pretty smart and disciplined laydown. Your jack is too weak. 10 deuce too weak. Okay, everyone folds and Ben Maxim gets a walk. Ace Queen looking strong. Okay, this is another clear time to re-steal. Jeff should definitely come over top of this guy, and again, he could either just shove all in, or he could raise like 1600. There's something real pocket minting. 1200 is maybe slightly on the smaller end. I think just re-stealing, because this guy could think he was pocket minted to call that bet. I think I probably would have just reshoved. It'd be a little stronger play, but the important thing is that he came over top and won the hand. Wow, now the same guy raises and we've got aces. Normally, I wouldn't be a huge fan of this raise because it looks like it wants action. But the key thing here is that just a hand or two earlier, Singleton made the exact same preflop raise and Ben Maxim raised to exactly 1200. So this is kind of forcing Singleton to make an ego call. Okay, he's pretty pot committed, and it looks like Jeff is just, wow. So he folds. He's really letting Jeff just walk all over him. I think that's a real clever raise size, given that he had just made that raise, and most guys are going to feel some compulsion due to ego not to let the same opponent just walk all over them. So normally that bet would have success, and Singleton probably just got frightened, and a lot of these guys are going to be very risk averse. Okay, this is a very smart move on Kid Wonder with a pretty wide range, and the reason I say that is because we've seen Dangler come in with raises from the small blind several orbits before him, and Kid Wonder's got to know that Dangler's range for open racing in the small blind is fairly wide, and there's 600 on the table, so at least calling would be pretty clear, getting 3 to 1 in position with a lot of hands, and with a hand like pocket deuces or something, which would be my best guess as to what Kid Wonder held, he makes a very smart re-steal. And he's not going to be a guy who's very easy to push around, because he's definitely a Siningo regular. And it's going to be one of those guys that you'd just rather not have in the tournament. All things equal, you get to decide. Velter has given us several walks now. So the way you would use that information is when he does get folded to him with a small blind and he chooses to open the pot, you give him a little more credit than you would most normal opponents. Okay, too weak. It's like Stockbroker busted bet to win in an earlier hand and come out to a fairly hefty chip lead. And one thing that's a little different about this structure compared to the normal stars sit and go, well, come. So Jeff with his king is facing raise to 555. Now a lot of guys would just shove here, and that would be correct a lot of the time, but Jeff really has very good post-flop skills, and he's looking to exploit that. So with a hand like queens or jacks, you should definitely re-raise. With aces or kings, if you feel confident in post-flop play, then this is okay. You know, if an ace flops and you know you're beat, then that's one thing, but okay. So Jeff flops top set, and he very prudently checks. Liquid Shoes is going to make a continuation bet with most hands here, and when he does, he's going to be pretty pot committed, and Jeff can spring his trap, but he checks behind. At this point, Jeff has to bet. Okay, we've got two high cards, there's a couple of straight possibilities, there's two diamonds out there, and you want to build a pot and to protect a little against the free draw. Jeff has to bet, and the bet's a little small, but one thing that's really nice about it is that what he's done is that, and I know this is conscious with him because he's a great post-flop player, is he bets for 100 to pot of 12. Well, the result is that Liquid Shoes really can't fold with just about any hand that he made that raise with before the flop, and when Jeff's shown weakness after the flop. Now the pot's over 2,000. What's Liquid Shoes' stack? Just over 2,000. So when the pot equals the effective stacks, then you've got a great opportunity to bust the guy. Bang, he hits his full house, and he can make a very large value bet here. He hasn't shown a lot of strength, and Liquid Shoes cannot fold very easily. So now he's offering Liquid Shoes really good pot odds of close to 3 to 1 here, and it's going to be very hard for him to turn it down with any kind of reasonable hand. So he's put himself in position to win a really big pot. And Poker Office tells us that he has queens. So that's a really good job of extracting value after the flop. Okay, ace 10 is definitely good enough to raise from the small blind. And, you know, if he had simply reshoved pre-flop, like a lot of guys would have, Liquid Shoes may well have called, and the result would be a similarly large pot 1. But a lot of times he's going to have a weaker hand, and based on the action there, Jeff really extracted as many chips as could possibly have been won with a king-high flop and his opponent having queens. So this is why I say to him that he needs to focus as much as possible on post-flop play relative to a lot of guys that focus on the Siningos and play a very pre-flop style. And it really goes to show that even, okay, again, Filter confirms the read that he needs to hand open from the small blind. Even in a more mechanical style of poker, such as the Siningo, there is room for some creativity. And you guys have seen that in a lot of my videos with the small ball strategy that I try to play, particularly when we're a little deep, maybe they're antes. And that's definitely the one I'd recommend to a guy with multi-tabling cash background like Jeff, but not one that I'd recommend to a player who didn't have a lot of no-limit experience and maybe wasn't really comfortable with things like analyzing the texture of the flop, getting value out of hands, and that type of guy would often be a lot better sticking to the more conventional push-fold game than many winning Senegal players play. Okay, like I was saying earlier, one way this differs from the standard stars sitting go is that instead of 100, 225 ante, it's going to be 153 with a 25 ante. So we'll have starting pots of 600. And anytime the ante is introduced, you're going to want to open wider because there's a lot more to take down. Okay, and Jeff is getting 3 to 2. This is a very blatant call with the jacks, but he'd want to call fairly wide. I mean, Singleton's probably going to be doing this with any ace, any pocket pair, a lot of kings, any two Broadway cards. And that ace-jack, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great shove. He had to shove, but he would be correct to do so with a lot weaker hands as well. Okay, Stockbroker, speaking of odds, was getting over 2 to 1 here, and Dangler is desperate, so Stock should be calling very wide with his. So Jack King is a clear call. He could have called with a lot lesser standards. Now we're down to four-handed, and we're going to be looking to really open up a lot and take advantage of the anti-money. Okay, getting 5 to 2 there. Good call. Folding isn't so bad. With, say, instead of 10-8 off, 10-9 suited, you definitely want to call. But it's not a good situation to re-steal. And one thing here is bet to win is gone. The guy who was always raising our completes. So getting better than 3 to 1. Jeff makes a smart complete with his weak king. And he comes out for a bet of about half the pot. It doesn't work, and now you should be done putting chips in the pot. And it's a very smart way to play. It's very unlikely going into it that Stock would have hit his ace. And because of that, the bet out of around half the pot, if it succeeds more than 1 times in 3, is going to show chip profit, and it will certainly do that. Okay, this is good. He's raising. The maximum's raising. This could be a time when you raise the standard 3 blinds. 750 works fine too. Okay, way too weak. And filter, since obviously 9-5 suited is way too weak to call, but we'd be tightening our standards anyway, because he's been tight earlier. Now this is interesting. Kid Wonder makes kind of an uncharacteristic double raise, and if I had a note on this guy, HB2XL is what I call instead of HBL, meaning that he routinely makes a min raise and won't defend that, then I would come over the top with the fours. With a really good tight aggressive player, the first time he makes this bet, I'm a little suspicious, and I wouldn't be too inclined to go over this. Just because it's kind of a weird bet, and if we see him do this more often, then it'll be a good time to exploit, but I think that's actually a smart laydown. Okay, this is a definite raise, and 750 is fine. 900 also be fine here, because he'd certainly call a re-steal from Kid Wonder. Important thing is that he raises. Jack Queen, another raise. Sometimes when I'm raising 2 consecutive pots, I'll vary the number just a little so it looks like I'm not stealing. You know, maybe raise to 700 or 800, but it doesn't really matter a lot. The important thing is that he raised Jack Queen under the gun in a four-handed game as Rachel's trying to lay down. So he definitely makes a correct raise. Okay, ace 2 would be good enough to complete, but not to call an all-in from the small blind. Queen 4 is too weak. And you notice there that filter raised to 750, and what's happened is that Maxim has become the trend setter. Usually you find one guy who begins raising to a certain amount and other guys copy his lead. Okay, Kid Wonder obviously correct to shove, and filter, he was facing a raise to around 7 blinds, and he's correct to call that with King 10 suited. He knows that Kid Wonder's going to shove wide. Kid Wonder didn't need anywhere near that kind of hand to make that play, and filter sucks out with a straight. One thing that's interesting is that if this were, let's say this were a normal $2,100 sit and go, okay, not a PCA qualifier, but a standard sit and go. In that case, the effects of Kid Wonder busting would be huge because that equity would go to everyone, not just filter, whose stack increases quite a bit, but to the remaining players because now they would all be guaranteed to money, getting at least 4,000 or so. But in this essentially winner-take-all format, instead of Kid Wonder's equity being distributed among these 3 guys, it basically all goes to filter. Now, because Kid Wonder was one of the better players to the table, it does benefit everybody that he's gone, but not nearly to the extent that it would in a standard sit and go. So filter benefits enormously, and normally us in Stockbroker would too, but here we just benefit a little from the fact that a good player is gone, but we're not guaranteed in the money or anything since it's essentially winner take all. Jack King, definite raise. And you know, filter has not been re-stealing a lot, And it would be for all our chips. Jack King isn't strong enough to play, so it's a smart raise and a smart fold. Okay, this guy's really raising to 855 a lot. Don't know if that's some significant number to him, but seems to be what he's feeling. And again, raise size getting copied. But most likely these 855 raises are steals, so we could definitely come over top of one of them. And these guys have really been, this guy's been calling bet after bet for the most part, and they're playing a huge pot now, and it's tough to say. These guys have maybe flop to 7. Wow, just an ace. Ace high. Okay, so filter wins a very large pot, and now he comes out to a distinct chip lead with their maximum stockbroker roughly even and blinds rising to 200, 400. Okay, filter with his definitive standards for opening from the small blind makes a raise. For a deuce would be way too weak against just about anybody, but certainly with a guy like that who has standards. And this is an unexploitable shove, 10 king suited from the small blind with about 10 blind effective stacks. Good play. Okay, 5-6 suited shoving here. This is not a the best play here. Um, Again, we're worrying about chips rather than equity. You're not going to be winning. This is an exploitable, notice I'm saying exploitable, not unexploitable shove, because enough hands could call that this isn't going to be showing a profit. And the pot is 675. It's not a big enough fraction with the 5-6 suited. So mid-suited connectors play very well against premium hands, and it's certainly not an egregious mistake, but particularly with a guy with good post-flop skills, that is not a play that is going to be maximizing his equity in this tournament. In fact, it's probably a slight chip loser, and particularly with a guy who's really good post-flop, it's not the strategy you should pursue. And same with this hand, you should just complete there. It's definitely strong enough for a complete, but I don't like the shove. Okay, so now Jeff is getting into kill mode. This shove, though, I actually is one that I do like because I believe it's unexploitable here. And not only that, it doesn't play well after the flop. You don't want to be in a position of calling or re-steal. So with about 13 blinds, I do like that shove. And now he pulls out over a comfortable second over Stox's third. Good check. And I would have called that bet. Just getting over 3-1 with bottom pair, and I'd give it up if Jeff didn't improve and this guy pursued it on the Turner River. But I'd take a card off getting 3-1 with bottom pair there. Not a big mistake, but okay, great re-steal. These are perfect stack sizes for a re-steal, so he could do this fairly wide even against a tighter guy like Filter. But ace jack and three-way play and 1800 on the table. Beautiful play, very nice. This is a classic re-steal, and very nicely done there. Okay, so Stockbroker goes all in, Filter calls. Filter definitely has a hand here, you can certainly believe that. And Stockbroker with over 10 blinds, he probably has some kind of a hand as well. Filters with the gap concept has got to be better, unless he's being dumb. And okay, ace jack is definitely good enough. King queen I think is about the weakest end of Filter's range, and he's definitely not going to be showing down anything weaker than that. Ace 3 suited. This is kind of an overbet there. I think that's an unexploitable shove. That's probably more than he wants to be playing for in that spot, though. Again, given that he wants to be playing a lot after the flop. But suited aces don't play super well. Low suited aces, are kind of marginal after the flop out of position, so that's not so bad a shove. Clear fold with the 4-7. And the stacks are equilibrializing, or whatever the word may be there a little. And now we're getting deep enough that we can maneuver a little. Pocket nines, and these are a hand that don't play super well after the flop. You should just re-steal immediately. And very nice. Okay, filter calls, which is a little worrisome. But nines, you really don't have a choice. So we'll see what he has. He's got to have some hand sevens. Beautiful. Okay, very nice. So Ben Maxim with a huge double up there and very smart shove. He gets filtered to commit with a worse hand, and very well played there. And this is another overshove that I actually do like because it's for about 20 blinds, but again, low mid pocket pairs don't play well after the flop. It's unexploitable, and he just shoves. Another reason that contributes to it, which Jeff brought up and I hadn't thought of, is that even though the math indicates that you only are looking for chips and not to advance in the ladder, it looks significant if you can get the heads up. Okay, it feels a lot better. It feels like you're closer. So Stockbroker may have some risk aversion that will not be mathematically correct because he wants to hit heads up. Okay, he's definitely going to have a hand to make that call. Again, I think suited Jack King is on the weaker end of his range. He had limped earlier with Queen Jack off during low blinds, and Jeff points out that very likely he's overvaluing his Broadway hands, and I think that's a very smart observation. And he plays for a very high average shake. I think that's exactly what's going on. So very, very smart there. And Queen King is a definite raise. One thing is that Jeff would have to call a resale from Stockbroker, but would be forced to fold to one from Filter. So I think a raise to around 1200 or so would be a little better. Again, this is being kind of nitpicky, but essentially he wants to raise the minimum since the Stockbroker is clearly pot committed if he re-steals, and yet he's not risking one extra chip than necessary in case Filter does come over the top. But the important thing is that he came in for a steal raise with a premium hand for four-way play. Three-way play, pardon me. Okay, blind's still 2-4, and 3-9 I think is too... You know what, he could make a very borderline shove there. 3-9 is very weak. Folding is fine as well. 2-10 definite fold. And Stockbroker should be shoving widely. And Jack 8, I think that's a good shove. He runs into Ace 10. Sucks out. But I do like the shove with Jack 8. And it's a clear call with the Ace 10. Jeff would obviously be happy to re-steal or call a big bet with that hand. I like this limp with the low suited queen. I like the bet out. And with the raise, with no draw, even getting 4-1, he's got to fold. But that's good. Aggressive play. And showing no fear of flop, which I like. And the stack sizes are a little awkward to be coming in for an almost raise there, and Jeff certainly couldn't make a profitable all-in, so I think that's a fine move. One thing that's interesting is that Filter again folds, so he had raised a couple of straight orbits from the small blind, and we wanted to make sure that he didn't make, it wasn't changing gears on us, and that he did indeed have standards to open from the small blind, and that confirms it when he goes back to folding once or twice, giving us a walk. Okay, Ace 8, I think that's a good call. And he just happens to run into Ace King. But Stockbroker, I've been shoving kind of wide. He just shoved that Jack 8. I think that's very reasonable. And 10's here. Now we're heads up, looking good. And Jeff raises Stockbroker limps for 400. Jeff raises to 1600. Very good. And now he's going into kill mode. It's a really aggressive heads-up player. Let's see what happens here. So he limps to the 5-jack, and we're dealing with effective stacks of around 25 blinds plus. So limping is a very legitimate play, and Stockbroker takes it away with a pre-flop raise. Okay, no reason to raise that. And he's got a fold here. If Stockbroker checked behind, he'd want to lead out any turn. Okay, this is a hand that could also, you can make a small raise. You wouldn't want to fold there. You can make a small raise. And this guy's really been pretty aggressive now in post-flop heads-up play. And even if Jeff was ahead there with his bottom pair, there's too big a chance that guy was drawing to something with that flop of two hearts and two middle cards. But this guy, I know he's raising again, is definitely playing real aggressive, and it's time to abandon the let's hope he plays kind of passively. Again, he's raising before the flop, so he's developed a very aggressive plan, and what Jeff needs to do at this point is to readjust and begin playing very aggressively himself and not allowing Stockpoker to take away the initiative with a lot of hands. Okay, there, the 6 high has no showdown value, so betting would be a better play there of around half the pot, be 650 to 800. And now, okay, Jeff just shoves, and I believe that's slightly unexploitable. Against a lot of guys, you'd want to play small ball. This guy clearly isn't allowing that, and so I think just shoving is fine. We've got a call, and oh, it's the nut flush in the river. So, tough luck, stockbroker. That's what you get for being so aggressive on our man here. But, you know, Jeff wasn't a huge, that's a good shove, Jack Queen. Wasn't such a huge dog because a lot of times it's going to be a split pot anyway. Definitely calling all in there if stockbroker had shoved. And looks like stockbroker's kind of lost his momentum a little. Ace-4 is a definite shove with effective stacks of 6 or 7 blinds. And he gets called by 9-10. Okay. So the guy turns a straight, but we still have a nice lead. This would be a hand that he'd be happy to play for all his chips. And there's probably not a lot of reason to come in for a smaller raise. Just shoving is good there. And this is another good shove. Okay, just over 10 blinds and chips. Low suited ace. Unexploitable. The guy has been raising a lot. So rather than limping or doing anything where he's going to have a tough decision between being the caller or forfeiting the pot, he just shoves. And again, a nice shove. And bang! King 10. Jeff has a nice lead going into that flop, and he takes it with stockbroker drawing dead going into the river. So, Ben Maxim turns $7.50 into a $12,000 seat in the Bahamas. Great job, man, and I think this was an excellently played step, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one. Signing off.